Hi folks, Matt Easton here, scholagladiatoria. So, as my regular viewers know, I occasionally do movie and TV fight reviews, and here's another one. This is one I've been asked to do many times. Apologies for my giant face on the screen, by the way, but I'm doing this on my computer screen rather than the usual TV screen, just for ease. And this is the fight between Aragorn and Lurtz towards the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, the first obviously of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I will pull my face out of shot now and let's have a little look at the fight and a bit of a talk about it. Well, how did Aragorn manage to kind of sneak up really speedily and then leap out of nowhere at Lurtz? Well, I suppose we can say that he's some kind of ranger skills he's using there, so maybe it's some elven trick that he's learnt along the line. But anyway, he leapt onto Lurtz's side, left-hand side, preventing the final shot going into Boromir. Let's see how the fight pans out. Right, this is one of those favourite binds that we see in numerous films, perhaps most famously in Star Wars with lightsabers, where two people come to their weapons being crossed and then they push and they tussle and then they break apart. And this has been used for as long as movies have been made. It's a very stage fighting way of doing things. In reality, if you come that close with your weapons crossed, there's any number of things you can do at that range. You can cut over the top, you could pommel underneath, you could pommel around the side, you could go for a disarm, you could go for a weapon grab or grabbing the person's weapon arm. You could knee them, you could headbutt them, you could wrestle. There's so many things you could do. One of the things you're perhaps least likely to do in a real fight is magically spring apart again. But anyway, let's carry on with the fight. Now this is an interesting thing. For some reason when Aragorn was thrown back, he flew quite a long way. I mean, I suppose Lurtz is supposed to be pretty strong. And hit a tree so hard that his sword went flying out of his hand. Relatively unlikely, I think, but let's give it the benefit of the doubt. Lurtz then threw his special shield, which has a kind of forked, spiky bit at the bottom that's stuck into the tree. Luckily for Aragorn, the bottom of that shield was cut out just in the convenient shape of his neck, so that it didn't just chop his head off, because that would have been pretty much the end of the movie, the end of the trilogy really, wouldn't it? But anyway, it's got this forked bit at the bottom that pins him to the tree, and we can see here that he's kind of stuck, you know, it's tight around his neck, and yet somehow, even though necks are smaller than heads, he then manages to remove his head from that very tight hole. Let's see. So that was kind of interesting. I like the fact that he slugs Lurtz in the gut, and Lurtz is like, yeah, what the hell, I'll just chuck you on the ground. That's kind of cool. I've got no complaints about that. Lurtz then, he's not the most, he hasn't got the most finesse, has he, with his weapon? And clearly his weapon isn't the most well balanced. And the way he just kind of like swings wildly at Aragorn while Aragorn rolls along the ground, to be honest, if you can't hit someone who's rolling along the ground with your machete-like weapon, falchion-type weapon, you probably need to practice a bit more. But let's carry on watching the fight. So that's kind of interesting. I think it's cool. He stabbed him in the leg with his backup knife. It's kind of Bowie knife type thing. That's cool, and also it reinforces how hardcore Lurtz is. The fact that he just kind of like, he's like, you motherfucker, and just punches him. That's kind of funny. But let's carry on watching. Again, we're just reinforcing how hardcore Lurtz is here. He just pulls, he beats Aragorn up, chucks him on the floor, then pulls the knife out of his own leg and licks it. What happens next makes you realise it was kind of unfortunate that he licked that knife, because if he'd just thrown it at Aragorn when Aragorn was rolling around on the ground, then probably it would have stuck in him and caused him quite a lot of trouble. But instead, he managed to waste enough time that Aragorn was able to retrieve his sword, which he can then defend himself with. Let's see. Where did that sword come from? So last thing we saw, Lurtz was headbutting and punching and throwing around Aragorn everywhere, and then he just went, oh yeah, there's that knife in my leg, yeah, I'll just pull that out. Oh, tasty, tasty blood. I love a bit of blood, especially if it's my own. Meanwhile, Aragorn's just going, where did I put that sword? Oh, here it is. Yeah, Lurtz probably, I don't think Lurtz the cleverest, is he? Anyway, let's carry on watching the rest of the fight. There we go, so that's a fairly famous bit, and everyone in the cinema at this point is going, yeah, come on, fight back. It's the Rocky moment, isn't it? Like, Aragorn's had the crap literally beaten out of him, probably literally, although I don't want to find out. And then he's come back and he's gone, oh, you motherfucker, I've got my sword back, bam, 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 bam. I'm really quick with my sword. You might be tougher than me and stronger than me and bigger than me, but I'm really quick and I know how to use a sword, and you're not as good with a sword as I am. And it's an interesting comparison because Aragorn's using a long sword. I haven't got any complaints about what he does. He just basically does a series of cuts, dum 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 dum, to different locations, which is good. He's going for different openings. He's not just hitting the same spot every time. Lurtz is now frantically backpedaling and defending with his pretty unwieldy and short and not having a handguard rubbish machete falchion weapon thing. And obviously eventually Aragorn finds an opening, and notice he finishes with a thrust. In so many movies we cut, there's a chop, 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 parry, parry, chop, parry, chop, parry, chop, parry, and the finishing move, haha, a thrust, like it's magically clever, like, ooh, they'll never think of this. But anyway, he finishes off with a thrust right the way through Lurtz's body. Let's see that bit. Now, I like this. As someone who studies historical documents and descriptions of fighting, and indeed modern crime reports and things like this as well, military accounts, it is very important to realise that a cut or a thrust with a sword in your body doesn't usually kill you straight away. You don't need to be an Uruk-hai, you don't need to be Lurtz. The fact is, if you run a sword through someone's body, they might drop down in shock. Shock and awe. It could be psychological effect, but history tells us there were lots of cases where people didn't do that. They carried on fighting for a bit until they either their body just went into shutdown, internal bleeding, external bleeding, or whatever, but they did carry on fighting, and that's why it's very important. Unlike in modern sport fencing, like in épée for example, you score a touch, and in whatever happens in the split second after that, 25th of a second after that, is irrelevant. In historical fencing, not the case. If I hit someone, I have to defend myself from their afterblow. So we recognise the afterblow as a thing because it happened historically. And this is nice because Lurtz gets run through, and he then carries on trying to fight Aragorn after that, as we'll see. Yeah, but Aragorn's not having any of that. He manages to extract his sword, which, if you think about it, is quite impressive because Lurtz is pulling the sword into his own body. So how did Aragorn, who we know is weaker than Lurtz, that's been completely demonstrated by this entire fight, how did he then manage to pull the sword out of Lurtz's body? Funnily enough, there are accounts from the 19th century of people being run through with weapons, bayonets and swords and lances, and grabbing onto that weapon in their own body, and the other person not being able to pull it out, partly because it was stuck in their body and partly because they were holding onto it. So it's slightly unbelievable that Aragorn managed to pull that weapon out, but anyway, he did somehow. It would have been more believable if he'd headbutted or kicked or kneed or stabbed with his some other kind of weapon, if he'd done something to facilitate that getting that weapon out rather than just pulling it. But anyway, I like the fact that he finishes off with a decapitation. The kids love it, it looks good, it's done well in special effects terms, and definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, people tend to stop fighting when you chop their head off. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.